Next, we'll take a look at a project that uses paint. So navigate to your Project Files folder, then navigate to Chapter 6, then open the project name 01 Painting_6. During the course of this lesson, I'll be using a Wacom tablet. Now you can use any other tablet. I happen to prefer the Wacom tablet. You can also use the mouse when controlling the paint. It's just a little more difficult to do so. When we invoke the paint tools, we can go up to the toolbar and select the paintbrush. When we do this, After Effects will automatically create panels on the right-hand side of the application. Notice that the brush tips panel and the paint panel are stacked on top of each other, and the paint panel is next to the timeline. This is a little clumsy, and you may want to change the layout so that it works better for you. In the upper right-hand corner, again, under Workspace, we'll see that After Effects already has a default layout for paint. If we select this, you can see that After Effects has created a small window for our main composition on the left-hand side of the application window, the layer window in the center, then over in the right, we have our paint controls, and below them are brush tips. Rather than using the frames in their current position, or using the workspace that After Effects gives me, I'll go back to Standard, then modify this by closing some of the panels that I don't need. I'm going to close the time controls, then close the entire frame for info and audio. I'll also close the panel for effects and presets, then move my paint options up with my brush tips. You may want to have the paint panel before the brush tips or the brush tips before your paint panel. Either way, simply click and drag on the tabs to make the priority that you want. Now with our new workspace defined, I'll go to Workspace, then set this new workspace as My Paint, and click OK. At any time, I can close down the paint and the brush tip window by going up to Window and selecting either brush tips or paint. You'll see in the pull-down window that the shortcut key is Control 8 for paint and Control 9 for brush tips. On the Mac, it's Command 8 and Command 9 for those windows respectively. Now that I'm familiar with the tool and the panels that come with it, I want to paint on a layer. In composition number 1, I have a solid, some type, and a shape layer. What I want to do is paint. First, I'll use the solid, then navigate up into the composition window. Here you can see the cursor jumping as I use the tablet stylus to navigate up to the brush tool. This is normal and happens every time the stylus leaves the proximity of the tablet. With the brush tool selected, if I click and drag inside the composition, I'll get a warning from After Effects that tells me I can't paint inside the composition. Instead, I need to open its layer window. I'll click OK to dismiss that box. Now, I can either double-click down on the timeline on the layer, use the Enter key, or double-click on the layer in the composition window. With the brush tool selected, double-clicking in the comp window will bring up the layer window, and I can see that the cursor has changed to a different brush. I'll use Control 8 to bring up the panel for paint. Now I can see the different properties that govern the paint tool. Here at the top, we have opacity, how much ink or paint is actually being produced by our paint stroke. Below this is our flow, which defines the amount of paint that we're laying down. And next to it is a profile of our brush. As I hover over it, you'll see that the icon turns into a button. By clicking this, I'll be directed immediately to the Brushes panel. We don't need to do that quite yet. Over in the color chips, I have two chips, a foreground and a background. Now, I don't generally use these to paint with foreground or background, but I can use two different complementary colors, or two colors that I'm working with, then switch between the two this way, rather than going to my color picker. Down in the lower left-hand corner of these colors is the default color selection. By clicking here, I'll reset the two color chips to black and white. Each brushstroke can carry a mode. By mode, I mean transfer mode. By clicking here, we can see several of the different transfer modes that we've previously applied to layers can now be applied to individual brush strokes. Below this is the ability to paint on channels and the ability to set a duration for our stroke. Next to the mode pull-down, there's an eyedropper which allows me to choose a color from anywhere inside the application window. Once I've set up the parameters for paint, all I need to do is click on the layer and drag. By doing that, I'll set a brush stroke. We can see down in the timeline that a paint effect has been applied to our layer.